And we're live. Welcome, everybody. Glad to have you here for the third installment of The Unveiling by Ruth Markel. Is mine backwards, you guys?
No,
Oh, okay.
looks fine.
It's backwards to me, but um, somebody speakers.
Okay. Should we put ourselves on mute if we're not talking? Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm going through somebody's speakers.
Oh, okay. I'll mute myself.
Oh,
Yeah. Why don't
I'll
we
mute
mute when
myself
we're
too.
not talking? Sorry, guys, we're we're in a little mini learning curve here, but thank you for joining us. I think maybe that worked. Okay, everybody's muted except for me. All right. Why is that muted? What? I know what it is. I got my YouTube open. Sorry, guys. Okay, my YouTube page was open. Thank you for your patience. This is a new situation, but we're ready to jump in now. Sometimes we're learning on the fly. So happy to have you all with us again for our third installment of the book club of The Unveiling by Ruth Markel. Today we're covering chapter 6 and chapter 7, which are the second chapters of the second section of the book. We're going to be reading and discussing as we go along, and we will give page numbers as we can. For people on a Kindle, we have one of our readers here is also on a Kindle. Somebody gave me a tip of searching on a keyword on your Kindle, and that will bring up where we are at because the page numbers don't coincide between the Kindle and the book. So we'll just be giving you the book page numbers, but on Kindles, I guess you can do a word search and that'll bring you exactly if you'd like to read along. Without further ado, before we get started, I would like to drum roll, bring on the star, the author of this book, Ruth Markel, who is joining us this evening for an introduction. She's not going to be doing Q&A or anything like that tonight, and probably not reading comments, but maybe we'll come back and read comments later. She's just here, I shouldn't say just, she is here to provide us with her presence and her beautiful spirit and some words about her experience around these particular chapters of the book that she wrote. So without further ado, here is Ruth Markel. And we will move Ruth over here. Welcome,
Wonderful.
Ruth.
Thank you. Thank you, Katiecoolady, Kathy, all the nice words for your leadership, your energy, your enthusiasm, and all your effort to really get this book club started. So I'm very, very much appreciative. And of course, I'll say hello to everyone. Judy, I know for a long time. Judy's just been in Montreal in probably the coldest part of our warm winter, where she had snow and terrible temperature. And hi, Allison. And so good to see you. And I haven't met you before, but I want to say hello also to Carol. And I also have a special thank you, I think, and she might be on. She was on the other program. To Mia Wallace, who did some beautiful work, I think, last week or so on the artwork related to the book. So this is really a pleasure for me, and I know some of you watched the STS interview before. So thank you again for all of your support and this great community. So what I wanted to do a little bit tonight, besides saying thank you, is kind of locate us where we are in the 2016 period and also where I'm writing. So I'm going to just explain a little bit from the part 1 writing to the part 2 writing, which is where you are now. So the part 1 writing was much more, let's call it emotional, dealing with grief, dealing with shock, dealing with the murder, dealing with my numbness. And by the time part 2 is coming around, we're getting ready for the court system. And I think that's an important point to really address, which is a little more, I'll call it cerebral, because besides, there's a tremendous learning curve that I've never been in a court before, but more specifically, the kind of information that we're gathering is very different than the emotional shock of part one. And I also want to talk a little bit tonight about something that is in the book, and it's called Lessons Learned. And I know you passed it, so it's page 100. And the reason I want you to just have a look at that, it's actually twofold. So first, as a writer, which I don't, believe it or not, I wrote 10 books and I don't consider myself a writer, but as a writer, I'll explain it, what I'm doing here. So in the 9 books before I wrote are more like the self-help category. And this is a little bit of that kind of writing, the lessons learned, because I was caught in terms of style. When I got to part 2, I really wanted to be more informational. Like, so the book has multi-purposes. One is to talk about grief, as you all done, and the other is kind of to lift the curtain, lift the veil on the trial life. Now, the trial life is something which I will call my writing to become more educational, is a better way of me saying it. I want to reach the reader who also could be going through a murder or a trauma, but really who's experiencing the court system. So the lessons learned is a way of me kind of writing the, not just the telling of the story, but to bringing in the information. And I know you're past that, but I felt that I wanted to just look at lessons learned just to give you a couple of the picture of what 2016 feels like and looks like. So the first one, I'm not going to talk about them all, but the first one is support. And actually, I did mention that today. Somebody asked me on STS before, what's the most important thing or the thing I would suggest? And it is support. And actually, I saw your comment, Katie. You commented that if you had had that experience years ago, you might have benefited as well if you knew about support. But support is huge, and support is everything. It's from the beginning to clergy to legal. As you know, you're coming to parts where I talk about a murder coach, which is a very unusual kind of support. And also, we had really a lot of personal support, like from our friends and Dan's friends. So I think support is, to me, one of the most important things in terms of going through any of these horrific experiences. Just to share with you something, this last week, the happiness guide came out about which countries were the most happy. And Finland scores #1, which is interesting because he describes himself, this author from Finland, that it's a pretty melancholy sort of mindset in Finland. However, what he does say, and I want to raise this under support because that's a critical point, he says, how much support we get often determines where we end up in life. Okay, so it's a really important thing. And he raises the writing is under the whole issue of support, not just in the kind of emotional support, but really creating those environments around us. And, today we use networking and all kinds of other terms, but support is heavier than networking. Networking is active, networking is interactive, but support is, I feel, if I use the term the way I think about it, it has a much more longer term commitment. And I think that's one of the things where the support really is a very vital part of kind of the lessons learned in this whole particular story. And besides friendship and all the other parts of it, and the lobbyists and all kinds of support that we had throughout. Okay, the next one you're going to find a little more interesting, different, totally different, politics and conflict. All right, so this story it's full, and I say that openly and not so much proudly, but it's full of politics and big P politics. So going back into 2016 now, we're at the time when Jack Campbell, who's now the state attorney, is running against another man, Pete Williams, and he wins. So Jack Campbell wins, who's a Democrat. The other person was a Republican. to get the position of the state attorney. But we're also in the real world, and many of you know this, and I did mention it in the books. So Meigs was the original state attorney in Tallahassee, and Meigs from day one was against, like, no matter what, sort of very, very, how do I say it, strictly, I don't know the word, profoundly, he didn't want 5 arrests at one time. Okay, so the context, because today people always say, how come it took so long, and so forth. So we're related to, whether the Adelsons would have come in right away with Sigfredo Garcia, Katherine Magbanua, and Rivera. So there's big politics. The case is heavy, heavy in politics in the milieu at the time. And when Jack Campbell came in, Jack Campbell was not necessarily in favor of having 5 people arrested, but he was definitely at the time in favor of starting the process. And that is a big part of the political drama, which continues today in this case, right? So it's an important part of sort of the original discussions. As a result of that story, then there's some in the, I think Tallahassee Democrat did something about it, but there became a really big conflict, which the public knows less about, but it's public, between the Tallahassee police, the TPD, and also the FBI versus the state attorney's office. Okay, so this was a kind of a separation, let's call it, in the teamwork, the gap. There was a gap in the teamwork for that period of time because they didn't all feel that they had the support in terms of subpoenas and bringing in people and so forth. And that shades the overall case for a good few years. We're still in 2016, right? So this is sort of the backdrop to some of the case in the earlier years. From the family point of view, the politics is small p politics. So we are now working with the Tallahassee Police Department, with the victim support people. And once the state attorney gets involved, so this is only after the arrests, we switch. So the family gets switched for victim support to the state attorney's office. So there's 3 periods of time in the case where the family has to kind of readjust and transition in the victim support process. So the first is the TPD was the one who kind of got us through the crisis. They told us what happened and so forth. So the initial switch is a difficult switch. It's almost, you're leaving, the trust person to start a new relationship. Anyway, we had a very good relationship with the state attorney's office, but that was like a period of time where we had to, I don't want to say goodbye, because Tallahassee Police Department never left. Craig Isom, was active with us, but the level of support to the family transitions at that particular time also. And now, as the appeals are on, we actually go to a third group of victim support, which is the Attorney General office. So there's just a lot of transitions in the process and so forth. So those are just smaller things. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I will say, if you look at criminal terms in the lessons learned, those are you're following it. So the big issue, and not only just learning about verdicts and murder for hire and bumps and stings and all these things, but there's always the issue, and it's still there today. If you look at the last slide, also we had many questions relating to who was paying the defendants' legal fees. So that is a question, and you see it even, carries right through to today. And also there was a actual hearing. It was probably a little bit later on, where Georgia and the defense team had a hearing about who's paying the legal fees, but the judge allowed the defense team to go in privately without Georgia's presence, and they told them something, and the judge accepted it. I'm not sure if some of you recall that or remember that, but that was a little bit of a disappointment, certainly to us and the public, because we would have liked to know back then who was paying the fees. And many of you might know, so this is important, if there is another arrest, she's in prison. So Katherine Magbanua's sister-in-law has been in jail because she embezzled, they say a little over $1 million from the accounting firm that she works for. And she's been in jail now for, I think, a couple of years already. And that happened all in this whole period of time about who's paying the fees. And she said, we don't know if this is true or not, that she had contributed to some of Katherine's payments. Katherine maintains, I think still to this day, that she had no other outside support for the payment of any fees. I believe that's still her position. So those are the things that, start to carry through right now. And you see how it happens early in 2016. And the bottom one is the most important one, the word evidence, okay? So we have to learn now. We're pretty green to the court system, although Shelley's a lawyer, so I can't really talk for her. But evidence becomes the mantra of the day, okay? And everything in this case is about evidence. And there's 3 types of evidence, and they don't always work together. And maybe later, if you're having conversations about it with the lawyers, they can even comment on it. So there's federal evidence, okay, which is different. Now, the FBI is a major player at this point. Just to put it into perspective, the Tallahassee Police Department doesn't have jurisdiction outside of Tallahassee. So when the arrests, for instance, for Garcia are made, it's all down in Broward County with the FBI and with the local police. The Tallahassee police does have, let's call it, a designated party there, but they really don't have jurisdiction. So it's federal rules, regulations, protocols are really an important part in this case because so much is happening outside of Tallahassee. So there's federal evidence that becomes part of the court story, let's call it. There's the state evidence. And at this point in 2016, we have the death penalty. So that's, remember, Garcia still has the death penalty on him. And we have conspiracy evidence. Okay, so this is another whole part. It's a very unusual case in terms of complexity because of the murder for hire. So when I say evidence becomes, and we're green, like, you're coming to this, evidence becomes the mantra of the day. And in addition to that, they don't always jive, let's call it. There's certain times the evidence, the hearsay evidence, I'm not going to get into the legal, you have 2 good lawyers here, but the difference in the evidence and what can be used and what can be not used. And this comes out, it still has occurred in the recent trials as well. So the evidence is probably, I think, the biggest, certainly lessons learned. So I'm at the point now where I'm describing, what am I learning in this process in 2016. So I think those are really the highlights. I'll just mention, I think, Kathy, you have later, you'll show the charts, right, of the timelines and the timelines of the actual people who are the witnesses, which is on page 134. I'll just describe 2 experiences to give you the feeling at this moment in time. And then you'll go back into, Kathy's going to put you all back in order like a good teacher in a few minutes. But on the witnesses, so everybody, as you all know, is very involved with Jeffrey Lacasse. But when you're in the court system, he's not so significant from our point of view yet. Now, the person who's most important emotionally, practically, and very early is Luis Rivera. Because if Luis Rivera botches up his presentation or his interview, whatever you want to call it, his testimony, we're in big trouble. And just to put it on a really personal level, we had a lot of friends in visiting us in Tallahassee at the time, and I couldn't go at night. I would actually say probably I was the most worked up about whether Rivera was going to be successful or not, because from a real personal point of view, we understood that his credibility was critical to move the case forward, like meaning what he was providing. So he was an important witness. I'm just describing our experiences. Now, the other one who's very important is Sergeant Corbett. You know, he does all of the cell phone towers. And put it in perspective, this is 10 years ago, is a long time ago. It's one of the cases that was so data driven and unusual, because before the cases were a lot, and not talking about Dan's case, I'm talking broadly, really on witnesses and so forth. But here you had a really very, very beginning process of how data driven the case was, because there's no DNA, there's no gun. These are things that one has to consider in really looking at, you know, how the outcome of the case can go. So I think that that's an important point, and it really, many people couldn't believe, you know, that the information was from the buses, from the commuter buses, from all kinds of normal things of daily life. And that was really an intriguing part in his witness test, and still is. And it's going to be more so now as we move forward with the current devices and so forth. So I think that's really what I want to say. The language for our life changes. You know, now we're into verdicts, deliberations, victim impact statements. So it's a very different personal journey from the part one journey. Like, this really becomes another whole phase of experience. Unfortunately, we still have those experiences. We've had 4 trials and convictions, and now the arrest. So I mentioned to Kathy, and I know she told you this in the morning, if you try to stay within 2016, wherever you are, 2019, because it really keeps you focused on what are the discoveries of the time, you know, versus sort of what we know today, and we do know much more today. So I think I just want to wish you all luck and congratulations, Kathy, Katie, whichever name I'm calling you, and all the best to all of you. And thank you really to everybody who's commenting. And I really appreciate all the work you've done on the book. And I hope you enjoy it. And I hope you continue benefiting from the book review, the book club. So thanks again.
Thank you so much for joining us, Ruth. And we will touch base again soon.
Sounds good.
Great
Okay,
to see you.
Nice seeing you all.
Have a good rest of your night. Hope you get some
thanks.
rest. You've had a busy day.
Yeah. Okay, take care. Good luck.
Bye for now.
Bye.
All right, guys. Well, let's just jump right in. So just to follow up with, you know, piggyback onto what she just said, is that we get off on a lot of tangents here. When I say we, I mean yours truly. So I'm going to really try to keep us focused, because especially in this part, because COVID was happening during this part of the book and had a huge impact on the proceedings and how that affected Ruth and her family and how that affected the legal process. And so we're going to take ourselves back in time to that time. And it'll be interesting to kind of look at that, like we all survived that, right? And sort of juxtapose it on what's happening right now. But like I said earlier today, we have a lot of places online to talk about this case, but we have one place to talk about this book. So let's keep our focus on this book. I'm going to keep lassoing us back in with the conversation, so we can really make this about learning and honoring this book and what Ruth and her family went through at that time, and really giving that our full attention. So you guys know Judy, you guys know Allison. We've introduced ourselves before, but I want our friend La Belvie to say a little hello, because this is her first time with us at the book club.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for asking me to join, and thank you to Ruth for giving those comments. It's actually really helpful for her to start with that, because some of the things I've noted and some of the portions I highlighted were consistent with what she said. So it's fantastic. So I'm excited to join.
All right, so we are coordinating 4 of us reading, and I'll be pulling comments up, because book club is about discussion, right? We read passages and then we discuss them, and that means you guys out there watching. So I'll be pulling comments up on the screen as well as we go along and read. We're lucky to have 2 attorneys with us tonight. So because this is heavy legal stuff, this is about in the trial, especially this first chapter here. So they're a great resource for us with legal jargon, legal concepts, and that sort of thing. So we're lucky to have our lawyers tonight. So I'm going to kick us off with chapter 6 and do my best. Let's all do our best to, except for La Bellevue, who's got her Kindle, but I'll do my best to put her page numbers on the screen as well, so you guys can follow along with your own books. So we're starting on page 124, trial life in Tallahassee, under courtroom life at the bottom of that page. The opening argument in early trial days were attended by Matt Benjamin and Sarah Kushner from Gibson Dunn. If you recall, Gibson Dunn is the Markel's personal attorney. This was a blessing for us because they provided further explanations and a map of what was yet to come. We were given the roster of witnesses by Helene Potlock, who was, as a victim advocate, was particularly sensitive to my desire to avoid being exposed to some of the more terrible images of Danny's murder. Because of this, I chose not to attend the first afternoon, which dealt with the police and medical murder scene. I stayed in the hotel to avoid the horrid details of the first hours after the murder, but Phil and Shelley attended. Every gesture, comment, and facial expression you make as the family of the victim in court is scrutinized. You learn to avoid mistakes and to use the attention to your best advantage. Abe Onhong, my murder coach, gave us the following advice, and we went over, he's the father of a murder victim who reached out to Ruth. By the way, you may not think it is important for you to sit in the front row of the visitors gallery. Not a waste of time. You have to be there since the members of the jury expect you there and indeed want to see that you care as much as they do. Remember, they are making less than minimum wage to sit there, Abe. So the next page is Judy.
How much did you want me to read? How about just like 2 or 3 sentences from?
I had marked the paragraph we discovered at the top of 126.
Okay, sure. We discovered what not to say at the trial, even just in passing. We learned this lesson the hard way when one reporter asked Shelley her opinion about attending court during the High Holy Days, and she answered that it was hard to be there on Yom Kippur, and that she wished the trial could have been suspended for that day, as the judge had been previously announced that it would be. This simple remark led to several stories on the local news reporting that comment. We remembered to bring blankets in order to stay warm in the overly air-conditioned courtroom, and we knew to avoid eating from vending machines, as nutritious meals would give us strength for the hard days in which we had to face the accused killers of our son, as well as a number of hostile witnesses who appeared to bolster their defense. This was our new normal. It was a surreal experience to see Garcia dressed in a suit and Magbanua wearing a professional-looking outfit with glasses.
Wow, that's interesting, isn't it? Considering it's like Groundhog Day, what's happening currently.
Yeah, so.
La Bellevue, you're up next.
Great. So I'm going just about a little further on. The case came to a conclusion after 2 weeks of testimony, 2 weeks filled with suspense, high tension, and much rapid learning, as Ruth mentioned. We longed to take a breath outside the building while the jury was out, but we had to stay close as the court was reconvened for every question the jury asked. During the process of jury deliberations, jurors can ask for a meeting with the judge to clarify some of the issues. The jury asked repeated questions about the judge's instructions, especially the explanation of Magbanua's role and whether she should be defined as a principal of the crime or a participant of the crime. As the jury sent out its requests, there were signs that the deliberations might be contentious, and it appeared that they were having trouble coming together in their opinions about her. Now, what was interesting is I went back and I looked at the jury questions, and I also looked at the jury instructions for the 2019 trial, the 22 trial, and Charlie's. And what's interesting is there is a jury instruction that was in the 2019 trial on independent actors that was not in the 2022 trial or the Charlie's trial. And it followed that definition of principal. And when you read that instruction, I think the jury got confused with that. And it's interesting because that instruction was not in the 2 subsequent trials. I also think that I've heard that some of the jurors that were interviewed after expressed a fairness issue of why are these, kind of underprivileged people being put on trial, and where are these rich, wealthy Adelsons? So it's not surprising to me that that mistrial happened. I mean, thankfully that didn't happen the next time. But I thought that was really interesting when I went back and looked at the questions. They were definitely grappling over it.
That is really interesting. And what do you think changed in terms of, I mean, who do you think argued about taking that instruction out? Do you have any idea?
I'm wondering if maybe the prosecution at the first trial was like, yeah, it's fine, whatever, and then realized that this caused major confusion and fought harder to get that instruction out. That's just my guess. But it is confusing when you read it, because it's like, wait a minute, you just, it's almost like goes against the whole point of a principle, because I think they were getting hung up on the fact that Katie wasn't the one pulling the trigger. So,
And that was confusing in that respect. Trying them together actually created a hindrance, didn't it? Just trying to compare the two in their roles.
Which is kind of interesting, because it's like we heard from Ruth about the politics and how they wanted to go one by one, but then they tried these two together. I'm wondering if they were going to go one by one, maybe they should have just tried them one by one.
Yeah, because look what happened when they did do Katie singly. Interesting. All right, let's keep moving.
So the period. Oh, go ahead. So further on, just right after that, the period from May 2016 to September 2019, as we just heard from Ruth, was a long haul, with many delays until justice was on the horizon. We wrestled with the prosecutor's decision to seek the death penalty for Dan's killers, even though our son vehemently opposed the practice. On the advice of Gibson Dunn attorneys who wanted to seek the harshest possible punishment as a negotiating tool, the prosecutor had pressed for the death penalty for the killers. We felt the irony of this, considering Dan's opposition to such sentencing. However, I was relieved that all 3 of us were invited to read our respective statements during the death penalty phase of the trial. When the jury handed Garcia a sentence of life in prison, not the death penalty, I was secretly comforted. It was what Dan would have wanted. That really touched me. Yeah. I know, Katie, you've had a lot of thoughts about the death penalty and all your experiences. So I think it worked out the way it was supposed to work out.
I do too. Agreed. Judy, how are you feeling about continuing reading?
Okay, I'll read a couple of sentences, but people,
you do what you can.
Your voices, so
it's not bothering me. But it's, I want you to be comfortable.
Okay, thanks. Okay, well, I do have to add that, Kathy, I've really appreciated your feedback about how, as a victim of crime, that it was so stressful to have this death penalty issue just hanging over your head for so many years. So it's something that, we might not think about too much. So
it's not the best thing for victims' families at all.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's great that you were talking about it. Not that's great, but.
Thanks, Judy.
Okay. Well, why don't you guys read that part, because my voice is just failing me.
Okay. We're just going to check in with you as we go along, because your voice is valuable, Judy, whether it's croaky or not. So.
Thank you. It's late.
And maybe we'll preserve your voice for commentary instead of reading, because your commentary is something we can't get anywhere else.
Okay. Right. Thank you.
I will pick this up at the bottom of 128, the second to the last chapter. The outcome of the trial was as follows. the judge, James Hankinson, rest in peace, imposed a life sentence on Garcia and another 30 years for the conspiracy to commit murder. Garcia's lawyer, Sam Zanganeh, said Garcia was, quote, still numb from the conviction and talked about the appeal process. In a death penalty case, when you get a guilty on first-degree murder, that's it. Your life is over, Zanganeh said. You're either going to die of natural causes in a maximum security prison, or you're going to die on death row as a result of lethal injection. He also mentioned that Garcia did not take the stand because he didn't want to hurt Katie. He was very concerned about his testimony hurting or implicating Katie. Interesting. That answers some questions, doesn't it? Allison, I've got you down for 129. Do you have that in your?
Yes.
Okay.
So at the bottom of 129, October 12th, 2019, my birthday occurred in Tallahassee. My thoughts were already on the reality that I was in Florida and my American grandchildren, Benjamin and Lincoln, lived in that state. We were still cut off from seeing the grandchildren, even after we clarified with a statement from JAFCO that we had no intention of taking the children away from Wendy. Only wanted to be reassured that a plan was in place for what would happen to them if other family members were arrested. And then jumping ahead to 133 along that theme at the beginning of 133. Instead of letting these traumas overwhelm us, we are trying to make positive changes. Phil, Shelley, and I are grateful that Florida lawmakers have introduced a bill advocating for grandparents following violent crimes to have a court hearing to see their grandchildren. Its success began as a long shot, and changing the tide in Florida, as well as in other states with similar draconian laws, will be a difficult battle. However, we miss Lincoln and Benjamin terribly, and we will never give up on seeing them. Dan would have wanted us to fight on. Yeah, I really think that Ruth's resilience and tenacity stem from her drive to have a positive impact, combined with honoring Dan's legacy and her love for his boys.
Absolutely. See if there's any. Death penalty usually keeps the case open indefinitely. It absolutely will not help in the grief of a broken heart. Yep, you have to learn how to compartmentalize it. I know I've been living with it for over 30 years. All right, well, we are going to shift up our picture here because we are moving into the land of Karen ciphers. So back to La Belle Vie.
So we're at an unexpected meeting, and this is actually one of my favorite parts of the whole book. So thank you, Katie, for letting me read this. So I often say that I'm a hairdresser junkie because wherever I travel, I find beauty salons in each city. The Tallahassee hairdresser scene was known to me as I'd frequently visited Dan. So that was my birthday plan for October 12th, 2019. As I walked into the hairdresser Fuel Salon, there was a young woman who jumped out of her seat and asked, "Can I give you a hug?" So then she introduces herself, and then it continues on. It turned out that Karen Halpern ciphers would be one of the best gifts of my life, and not just my 75th birthday gift. Let me explain. She told me about how she and a group of friends had an intense interest in Dan's murder, the investigation, and the trial. Apparently, their involvement never waned, and they had been continuously on top of the investigation. We ended up meeting for sandwiches at a deli in the same plaza as the hairdresser, and she asked me, "What can I do for you?" I blurted out, "Grandparent alienation." I'm getting shivers. She said, "Done." I love that part. And Karen's awesome. So I just think that's so important that this chance meeting, that she gets one of the best presents of her entire life in this, stress of a trial. Like what a gift, right?
Mm-hmm. I am trying to figure out how to put somebody's picture other than myself up there with a photo. And I'm not sure, maybe society page, you could let me know if that's even possible in here. Like I said, I'm kind of learning on the fly. Is there any other part of this about Karen that you wanted to
Oh,
read?
yeah, I mean, the rest of it, I didn't want to, I mean, the rest of it goes into, I didn't really highlight the rest of it. It was just talking about continuing on and then working toward, it was something that, I thought it was interesting where she says in that section how she had been taught, people had talked to her about a potential legislation and lobbying, but it was so much. I mean, as she said, the family's just dealing with like the grief and now transitioning to trial life. But then, when she ends that part, deep down in my heart, however, I knew I had to embark on this advocacy journey to see our grandchildren. And the Markel Act comes up in other parts of the book that I'm covering. So I kind of was focusing on just that meeting. And then, of course, everyone should buy the book and then they can read the rest of it, right?
That's right.
Don't want to give away the kid. What does it give away I'm bad with phrases. I want to give away the kitchen sink.
We could sit here and read the whole book, couldn't we? But I'm just putting Karen ciphers back
But this
there.
part, this relationship is just so important, as we know, those of us that are so invested in this case. So
Yeah.
it can't be unemphasized how important Karen was and is.
And is. She's a major support person to Ruth. And she's also a very kind of quiet, humble, behind the scenes person. Beautiful.
But very strong. Very strong.
Very strong. Yes. All right. Back to Allison now. Let me find Allison. We're moving along to page 133. I do want to add something to this bit about the Markel Act, and that there is a video that's been circulating around a hearing, and it's a really good glimpse into that hearing. But that was just the beginning of that process. That did not result in the passing of that act. That was in 2020. And Society Page has it on his channel, and I shared it over here too. There were multiple hearings after that one, and it didn't go through till 2022. So Ruth was very adamant about wanting to clarify that. And if you didn't know, she was on Surviving the Survivor today, and a very good interview there. And she was talking quite a bit about that there. But she really wanted me to clarify that the hearing that you're seeing on that video was just the beginning of it, but it wasn't a conclusion of it yet.
And it's interesting, that hearing's really interesting because that is not ultimately where they, went. When you read the language of the actual bill, which was put into law, it was made effective July 1st. It's a little different than what you were hearing in that initial stages. But Karen had sent me the bill and some of the legislative history if you're like nerdy and want to legal stuff, but I found it really interesting. But, it was ultimately affected. Of course, unfortunately, unless and until Wendy is convicted, it doesn't, unfortunately, directly benefit the Markels. So I think it has indirectly benefited them, as we've seen.
Yeah, exactly. So it has been provided some success. In fact, Ruth shared with me that she thinks the journey toward passing that bill and the passing of that bill is the primary factor toward any visitation she's had with the boys. Is that. So, worth it. All right, back to you, Allison.
Okay, on page 134. Danny was brutally murdered in cold blood. After waiting 5 long years, we are relieved that at least one of the people responsible for Danny's murder was convicted today, and are grateful for the tireless efforts of law enforcement and the state attorney's office. Yet justice was only partially served today. In light of the mountains of evidence presented by the state attorney's office, we are confident Katherine Magbanua will be retried and convicted. As all who followed this trial know, there is much more work to be done to ensure that everyone responsible for Danny's murder is held accountable. Until that day comes, we will continue to fight for complete justice and to be reunited with our grandchildren, Danny's 2 young boys who we love and miss dearly. While we were satisfied that Garcia's verdict My family and I were dismayed by the fact that Magbanua would get a second chance in court. A new trial date for her case was scheduled for April 2020, and I wondered how many more times I would have to recount the story of Dan's murder and what it meant for us as a family. It was clear that court cases had become a carousel that would spin and spin, and I would have to find the strength to again sit through the evidence and another group of witnesses. Our final thoughts, shared by others, were gratitude for everyone's support and that the ordeal was far from over. We held on to the hope that ultimately everyone who was responsible for Dan's killing would be brought to justice. I think that Ruth's restraint is evident in so many ways, and this is just as an example throughout the book. She never says, like a lot of us do, Donna, Wendy, and Harvey need to be arrested now. She instead so eloquently expresses her hope that everyone responsible is brought to justice without calling specifically for certain people specifically.
I agree. And with that being said, we're moving into the roster of witnesses. Now, remember, at the time that she wrote this book, Magbanua's second trial had not happened yet. So we're still in this limbo stage. While she's writing it as the other things are going on, obviously. But, she ended this book before Magbanua's second trial. So, we know the outcome of that, but let's kind of bring ourselves back to that moment and what was happening then, which was the advent of COVID was happening at that time, which had a huge impact on this. But going forward in her chronology, she does a whole breakdown of significant witnesses in the it's now become trials, many trials, plural. And so we're going to highlight these witnesses, starting with Allison, back to you again, James Geiger.
One of the most important witnesses in the investigation and trial was James Geiger, Dan's next-door neighbor. The role he played was major as he heard the shots and saw what appeared to be a light-colored Prius leaving Dan's driveway. I think that James Geiger is one of the unsung heroes of the story who deserves a lot of credit for being vigilant enough, altruistic enough, and brave enough to check things out when he heard gunshots. His description of the getaway car was a key piece of evidence that led to the hitman. And I think he was really instrumental in solving of the crime. And in this passage, Ruth gives him the credit he deserves and is so characteristic of her gratitude. I'm just going to go off camera to see if I can quiet the dogs down. Did you want me to?
Okay, I'm not sure what happened, but I think we'll just go ahead to the next witness, which was Stuart Schlazer. And this was the teacher for the School of Arts and Sciences. This was the one that, Dan was talking to Stuart at the time he was shot. This was the teacher that was giving him some input on the school. And if you recall, this was the school that Wendy had unilaterally signed their older son up for without conferring with Dan, which was a violation of the marital settlement agreement and exactly one of the problems and one of the issues that were subject on that grandma motion, that counter motion to enforce the marital settlement agreement. So I find it very ironic that even up to the day Dan was murdered, she's violating the MSA. Anyway, As mentioned, and this is the part that I found chilling and I didn't know until I read Ruth's book, was as mentioned in the earlier chapters, I was on the phone with Dan before the shooting, but was spared the last few minutes because Dan wanted to make a call to Stuart Schlazer. How fortunate I was not to be the person on the other end of the phone when Dan was murdered does not escape me. Many times I think about this unimaginable situation as I could have been the person to hear the shooting. I mean, I just can't even imagine. Like, again, what God's hand, coming in and making sure that wasn't the case. I can't even imagine how that would have even compounded to the family's grief and to Ruth's grief. But here's where the next portion that I think shows again Ruth's grace. She said, I can't thank Stuart enough for calling 911. Life has so many paradoxes. An unknown contact was now mixed up in the middle of this murder case. This is a real example of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, a situation that now has impacted Stuart's life. He has been a crucial witness in the investigation and Dan's trial. And I think like Jim Geiger, right? I mean, this impacted them. This impacted so many people, not just the victims, not just the family associated with the defendants, but all of these people. I mean, here's a teacher. He's just like, talking to a friend of a friend about a school, and then he happens to hear a murder. So I just, I thought that was really moving. I don't know if anyone else is here. Am I the only one here?
Nope, I'm here. Can
Oh,
you
okay.
hear me? I'm still trying to figure out what I'm doing here. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it just goes to show you that the ripple effect and the long range trauma on other people. I mean, can you imagine being on the phone with somebody at the time they're shot? And now he has to live with that the rest of his life. I mean, it's just unending, absolutely unending. All right, let's move on. Judy, how are you with reading?
Can you hear me?
Can hear you.
Oh, okay. So the one short paragraph that I thought was worth pointing out is
On Craig Isom.
Yes, Craig Isom. On that same day, July 18th, 2014, Craig had a lengthy interview with Wendy, which became highly publicized and elicited many opinions. The interview raised eyebrows, and people's opinions and impressions varied as to how much drama or truth was revealed by her. So, isn't that the truth? I mean, people are still showing and reacting to Wendy's interview, quote, interview. It wasn't much of an interrogation. Also, I do find it kind of strange how Isom told Lacasse that Wendy wasn't a suspect, because I'm sure in retrospect, now people are all kind of like, what? Are you kidding me? Why did you not even think she could be a suspect? So thank God Jeff Lacasse went back over and over and over again to try to get the record straight.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully Isom is doing okay.
Yeah. No kidding. Yeah, I mean, just what a major long-term witness he's been and will continue to be because of that interview. That interview is going to be sliced and diced for eternity, because I don't know about you guys. The first time I watched that interview, because I knew something about the case, I thought, and I'll admit, I was naive and bamboozled, but I thought, wow, I'm so surprised. She really seems like she doesn't know anything about this. She really seems like she's uninvolved the first time I watched it. And then gathering more information, by the second time I watched it, it was like through a completely different lens. And then, I could see the performing and the lying and the contradictions and the inappropriate reactions and all of that. But I mean, I've been around sociopaths. I would think I have a little bit of radar, and it shows how good she is at it, because, I know I'm not alone in having that initial reaction to her interview. And any comments about that, you guys?
I think that's particularly interesting in the context of that message that Donna sent her about that she can be a good actress. And we also heard from a high school friend that she had been like in the drama club. So it does seem like acting. I'm surprised though that she could actually go and have a big lunch, like knowing what she knew. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. Okay, let's put up now somebody. I'm hearing myself through somebody else's. So we might have to mute you guys. I'm going to mute you guys again, just in case that's where that's coming from. Okay, we're moving on to Patrick Sanford. Anybody that has followed me for any while knows that, I got my Pat Sanford move, I tried to doing the Pat Sanford. He walks like an airplane. I mean, I'm always going to be amused by that, because I said this man walks like an airplane because I'm just there in the courtroom giving color commentary, and he walks in like he leads with his head and he leans, he flows, and that's just was my first observation. And then he ends up in the airport arresting Donna. Like, I can't get over it. So I'm going to read about, I'm going to read some about Pat Sanford. So Pat Sanford is an FBI special agent. So this speaks to what Ruth was saying, is that you've got the state agencies and then you've got the federal agencies, and they have to work together. And in some cases they do, and in some cases they don't. In this case, they did really work well together, and they bonded together because who they were like against, so to speak, or at odds with, was the DA's office. So the local law enforcement and the FBI were sort of bonded together, which, is just the complicated politics of the whole thing. But anyway, to Pat Sanford, page 137, if somebody wants to throw that up there. Due to the work of Patrick and the FBI, there were many discoveries relating to the geographic capability of the investigation within Florida and other states. The local police department's range of influence in an investigation is more limited than the FBI's. The FBI has better forensic and technological equipment, as well as available manpower in an international network. At the trial, Patrick testified about the wiretapping and evidence gathered from the cooperating witnesses. We have not heard the end of what was uncovered during the wiretapping, and we haven't. We still haven't. That's major. That's trickling in now for the next trial. So I thought that statement was very prophetic, because this is before Charlie. This is before Donna's arrest. I thought that was a very prophetic statement. Despite much being public record at this point, few have heard the extent of communications between all the co-conspirators, and we still haven't. Patrick's efforts were extensive and thorough. Patrick, Craig, and their colleague, TPD investigator Sherry Bennett, interviewed huge numbers of people who provided evidence and many surprising discoveries. So that is Patrick Sanford. All right. We are now moving to Luis Rivera.
Yeah. So again, it was so helpful to hear Ruth's comments on Lewis being at this stage the most important witness. And it really is, and she talks about that in this segment, with how he connected Garcia and Magbanua, and the controversy that some people had that he got a sweet deal, but that's what happens when you do the right thing and turn state's evidence, right? So, but the part I chose to read was actually consistent with what we just heard from Ruth. And so it's at the very end. Despite his criminal history and gang affiliations, Rivera's testimony was seen as forthcoming and honest. He was respectful and seemed comfortable providing every detail that was asked for. Many of these details were corroborated by physical evidence, such as which motel the two stayed at, the people they encountered during their time in Tallahassee, and the timing of phone calls to and from Garcia and Katie. And of course, we know in future trials, in addition, that whole hole in the Prius, right, with the gun. He testified that Garcia said they were hired by the lady who wants her kids back. I was drained from hearing Rivera's testimony. It was essential to the case that he needed to be credible. Fortunately, it turned out that his testimony was effective. And that really struck to me how stressful that is for the victim's family, right? Like, because they don't know how these witnesses are going to perform. And, this is a gang member, right? I mean, he's a criminal. Like, you don't know how he's going to come across. So I guess I just can't imagine how stressful that was for Ruth and the family. So I thought that was really interesting to read about Lewis.
Yeah, and Ruth she said it today here, and also I believe on STS, about how Rivera was so critical, and at this stage so dicey, because they didn't know what he was going to do, and if he was going to flip flop or whatever. And she knew without him, everything, all the dominoes are either going to fall in one direction or stop. So he was very major witness, and I thought he handled himself very, very well in all the trials.
All the trials. Yeah, he's been a great witness.
Okay, now moving along to Christopher Corbett. Judy, did you want to?
Okay, let me try. Okay. How about this? The cell phone evidence exposed the reality that this information is so easily available with the proper expertise, material, and equipment. My thoughts lingered on the slogan, "Big Brother is watching you," from George Orwell's novel 1984, dealing with surveillance and security cameras in a totalitarian society. So this again is why I still have high hopes that something could happen against Wendy and Harvey with all this searching of the cell phones and WhatsApp.
I agree, Judy. I think, again, we're going to see a lot more of Chris Corbett. And I thought he was an excellent witness. That man just exudes credibility. And he's so composed. Like, he's very hard to cross-examine because he's just he's unwavering, and he's all business, but very likable. He just knows how to engage with the jury. I also thought he was one of the best witnesses there, too.
Yeah.
There was some interesting commentary on STS. John Sawicki, who I think was part involved with the 2019 trial, but he's a lawyer, but he's since gotten a degree in digital forensics. And he was on a recent show where they brought back a panel to discuss the new update to Celebrate, which was the reason for the additional warrant on Donna's phone. I know we're not going to talk too much about Donna yet, but what the John Sawicki said is that he's interviewed, he's been involved with thousands of cases. He said that Chris Corbett is one of the most sophisticated, talented, clear witnesses he's ever seen. So Tallahassee is lucky to have him, in my opinion.
Wow, that was what was that on? It was
on STS. I think it was a week ago. It was when they did the refreshed warrant for when there was some Celebrate technology that came out, some updates in end of February. And so STS had a show where they had John on. I think Tim Jansen was on as well, but it's within the past week or two. It's really good listen if you want to hear a little bit more about the forensic.
Anybody out there is so inclined, if you could find a link for that show and pop it into the chat, that would be fantastic, because I'm sure I'm not the only one that would like to see that. And I missed that entirely. So thank you for that.
But it was good to hear about his perspective of Corbett and how he takes such, complicated information and just distills it for the jury in such a phenomenal way.
Yeah, he's confident, he's cool, he's unshakable, and he's freaking smart, and he knows his stuff. I mean, Rashbaum's like a gnat flying around. There's no end to mess with that man. And his it's been important up till now, but I think it's going to be even more important. Don't you? LBV.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I like Judy. I can't wait to see what's on all these devices.
Judy, is that the link? Wait a minute.
Yeah, I put it in the chat for, see, we're helping to market STS.
Yeah.
I
So
mean, they
there's
do
the link.
great
Here's
job.
another. So
I just thought it was
if
really
anybody wants to
interesting.
snag that,
Yeah.
I'm gonna copy and paste that right now into my browser just so anyway, I'll deal with that later. All right.
Thanks, guys.
I assigned myself Jeff Lacasse because I have a very special place in my heart for Jeff Lacasse for many, many reasons. And I always will. I am a Jeff Lacasse stan, and I will always go to bat for Jeff Lacasse. I have been since the beginning of this, and I'm not going to count the ways. I've done that before, but I have a lot of admiration, a lot of empathy for this man, and I have a distinct sensitivity toward Jeff Lacasse and his role in all of this, which is, like Ruth, unending, seemingly. Okay, page 139. Jeffrey is a social work professor at FSU. He dated Wendy until just before Dan's death or just after it, as the two had not officially broken up at that time. We were very familiar with that situation, as Jeffrey had been resolute in his contact with the TPD and multiple interviews with him had been taped. In 2016, law enforcement could have interpreted Jeffrey's comments and information as a disgruntled boyfriend. Didn't they try to do that in court? As we learned that Wendy initiated taking a break from the relationship just days before the murder. Fortunately, this was not the case, and Jeffrey's comments and information were credible and candid. Unfortunately for Jeffrey, though, his testimony suggested that he may have been used by Wendy as some sort of foil or patsy in the murder. Jeff reported that Wendy may have done things to make him look suspicious. For example, Jeffrey said he met Wendy's family while they were dating and that he saw Charlie's car collection. Garcia's attorney, Sam Zaganay, asked, so she knew what a Ferrari was? Wendy had claimed during her testimony that she was unaware of the type of car that her brother drove, claiming, I drive a minivan. This woman. Jumping down, there were many other contradictions between Wendy's testimony and Jeffrey's, which is why I thought it was brilliant that in Charlie's trial, they put Wendy on and boom, followed her right up with Jeffrey. For example, Jeffrey testified to how deeply Wendy wanted to move to South Florida and how upset she had been when the court ruled against her, directly contradicting Wendy's statement at trial that she had been, quote, relieved when forced to stay in Tallahassee. Can we just do a complete collective eye roll on that? Relieved, she said. As noted, one of the most important parts of Jeffrey's testimony was what he claims Wendy had told him on July 13th, 2014. She, quote, she said that Charlie had explored all options to take care of the problem and looked into having Professor Markel killed. That is the stomach flipped. I don't know about you guys, but whenever I hear somebody say my stomach flipped, I go right back to Jeff Lacasse. My stomach flipped comment, which will go down in record of this trial as one of the big statements. All right. Well, Judy, how do you feel about
Geez.
bringing in Wendy?
Okay. Well, the Wendy, here's a short little tiny paragraph. Public opinion was significant and aroused in response to Wendy's claim of being, quote, relieved when the court ruled she couldn't move away from Tallahassee. And even a few of her old friends no longer trusted her after this testimony. So, I mean, that's pretty important to me, that there were still plenty of people supporting Wendy and thinking she wasn't involved until they saw the way she testified back in fall 2019. So for so many years, she probably thought she had fooled everybody.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm glad Ruth mentioned this.
Yeah, and it really makes you wonder, like, what truly has been the outcome since then, since all the way back to here, what's truly been the outcome in her life, in her real living social circles life is pretty unknown, but you would imagine, you know, I mean, how would you guys feel? You were, I think all three of your moms, right? How would you feel if your kids were wanting to like go over and play with other kids and Wendy was the only parent there? Now, how do you think, how do you imagine you would feel?
I don't want to have anything to do with this weird person who probably had something to do with her ex-husband's murder.
Yeah, I would say that her boys are welcome to come over to our house anytime, but I wouldn't want my kids going over there.
Mm-hmm.
That's the problem with keeping your kids away from Wendy. You're also isolating the boys too, indirectly.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's really complex and sad. And I think that's back to Ruth, that, you know, speaks to her maintaining her focus on the boys. You don't hear her talk about Wendy very much, or the Adelsons really that much. You know, and I think because it's so complex, you know, I mean, they're going to receive the ripple effect off of their mother, and you don't want to see that happen. So
Yeah.
it is complex. All right, to our last witness then, Katie Magbanua, and that goes to Allison.
In a move, as this is on 142, in a move that surprised many, Magbanua appeared on the witness stand on October 9, 2019, and denied any involvement in the murder. One of the more interesting statements she made was that when she was asked if she believed that Charlie was involved in the murder, she answered affirmatively, based on everything she had seen and heard at trial. Her lawyers continued to claim her innocence and showed little inclination for plea bargaining. It turns out that her testimony was on Dan's birthday and the Jewish holiday of Yom Kippur. Yeah, I think every time she testifies, she's creeping closer and closer to the truth, but she's still minimizing her own culpability, even in the last trial.
Oh yeah, I mean, how did you think she did in the last trial that we just saw compared to this trial that she's writing about in terms of just her credibility? What was your sense about that?
I think she looks more and more credible, but I think one reason they didn't keep her on the stand for that long in the last trial is because her story has been shifting and, you know, shifting to the truth. I think the other side can point to a number of inconsistencies in her testimony. And so in that way, she's not as credible as the other hitmen, or the hitmen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're only going to use her for what they have to use her for, which is the damp money and the Adelsons dropping the money off, you know, I mean, because they don't want her on the stand any longer than they have to have her for the obvious reasons Allison just mentioned, you know.
Yeah, with the damp money, you know, we see again and again that the people who orchestrated Dan's murder were too smart by half. You know, some of their strategies, like setting up Jeff and washing of the money, were self-defeating, actually implicating them. Yeah.
Dirty money.
So let me ask you this, La Belvi. Do you think that her testimony was so clipped and minimal in this last trial compared to, you know, the one Ruth is writing about, because they were trying to limit what they could cross-examine her on?
Yeah, because I mean, you saw Rashbaum tried to, you know, I'm blanking. Judy, what am I thinking of? What's the legal? I'm blanking.
What?
Destroy her. I mean, destroy her credibility.
Oh, impeach her?
Impeach.
Impeach her, golly.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a completely different focus now. I mean, this is really to get in the fact that we've got to link the Adelsons and what she can show to show that Charlie was involved. And, and then in Donna's trial, how Donna was involved. So yeah, there was no benefit to the state to keep her on the stand very long. And they would use different witnesses to show things that they could have potentially used her to establish. They weren't going down that route. They were going to only use her for what they had to. I still think she came across okay. I mean, I thought that where she came across, which was kind of I thought kind of funny part of the trial when she was talking that how Sigfredo told her to blow dry the money. And then she's like, blow dry it. And I thought that was actually came across very credible because I could see Garcia saying, just blow dry it. So, I mean, I think she came across okay.
Yeah, and it's such a strange detail that has an element of who would make that up.
Yeah.
So it led to her credibility, those kind of weird little non sequiturs, Anyway, getting back to the current, I know it's easy to jump ahead.
I like seeing the little dog behind Allison.
Oh,
Aw,
there's 3 dogs. Yeah.
doing the photo bomb. I love it.
Yeah.
But it's just sitting here being aware of how challenging it is to pull the focus back to this book and what happened during these trials, because there's been so much since then, and there's so many players and there's so many moving parts, speaks to what the Markels have had to navigate for so long. 10 years now they've had to navigate this, and not that they've ever been officially gagged, but they've had a lot of restrictions on their voice, what they can say. So even in Ruth writing this book, I'm reading, I've read it through twice now, and I can feel her constraints at times. Like she's not saying what she really wants to say. So she might be using somebody else's voice to make that point. And I mean, I just can't, she's had some heart issues, and I'm not surprised that like having to have all that bottled up for so long, waiting for the next proceeding is just a huge, huge burden.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just,
yeah, you're not even supposed to show much emotion in the courtroom. So
right. Just have your presence there. And yeah. Okay. On to, I want to read this, and I had you, La Bellevue, for this part about the money on 142.
Oh yeah. Speaking of money,
Yeah.
and this paragraph is going to be as relevant as it was then. It's even more relevant now. So she's talking about Mary Hall. So money was very relevant in this case. And on day 6, there was a serious review of Follow the Money story. Mary Hall presented very explicit information on the bank records resulting from her investigation into white-collar crime and financial crime expertise. Her testimony provided a glimpse into the money trail and connection. We've gotten more into that, right? Hall's review included Magbanua, Rivera, Garcia, the Adelson Institute, Charlie Adelson, Harvey and Donna Adelson. I think they actually also had Wendy's financial data and Charlie's independent traveling dental practice. So again, I think as we continue on, now that we've got the Adelsons, we saw Mary Hall take, she was an important part of the first 2 trials, but even more with this trial. And it's going to be, I think, just the same, if not more, with Donna.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I put Wendy up for the money part because the more I've contemplated Wendy, and I'm not alone, I'm sure all of us have tried to look at her from every facet. I really think the money was a huge motivator for her, bigger than what I once thought. Just going over to 143, just a brief little blurb here, but it meant something to me. In essence, I summed up my own experience of a, quote, life sentence and heartbreak. Some people on social media made comments saying I was cueing the jury to choose a life sentence for Garcia rather than the death penalty, but I was not. It speaks to the fishbowl that they're living in as well. And I'm just saying, shame on that person for saying that. Do not speak against Ruth Markel in any way, shape, or form. Do not do that. That will not be allowed. Okay, moving forward. We're on to the next chapter now, chapter 7. Post-trial in Toronto. And they're talking about going home after that trial. And then, I'm going to read this part. And then moving forward on page 146, if somebody wants to put that up there. And this is just, I like to read these correspondence with her murder coach just because that's very personal to me. And I did put that when she was talking about support. I mean, it made me realize how little support I had, when I went through our murder trials, and like how I would have loved to have that kind of support, and how I yearn to be that kind of support now, and hope I am that kind of support. So at the top of 146, on May 26, 2020, I received this encouraging email from Abe Anhang. Hello, Ruth. Has a new trial date been set yet? It took them 5 years to complete mine too. Problem is, the defense lawyers have figured out that if they delay in a small percentage of cases, they will win because witnesses forget, they pass away, they get intimidated, etc. After I finished law school, I too worked in criminal law for a couple of years and saw the terrible abuses. It was those abuses which chased me away to business law. When the law's delays get you down a little, remember that for a lawyer, this is just another case. While for the person affected, it becomes the world. Since, to paraphrase Pirkei Avot, I'm saying that wrong, when a life is taken, it is as if a world has been destroyed. Cannot be said better than that. Soon after our tragedy, I realized that the onus to bring the accused to justice was on me, just as it is on you now. You are not required to take the law into your own hands, only to ensure that justice is done. All the best as we celebrate Shavuot, the day when the Torah law was given to the Hebrews. I apologize for my bad pronunciations there, but you get the point. So I thought that was a very poignant and beautiful letter, and I'm so glad that Ruth has that support. So moving forward, Law Belvy, I want you to kind of take us on a trip here about the implications of COVID on this case, starting on 151, because this is a very detailed and prominent part and meaty part of this post-trial business as they waited for the new trial, the retrial, to come about during the time of COVID. So take it away, Law Belvy.
Yeah, so where we are in the timeline right now, we're in 2020 and we're in the midst of COVID, and Judge Hankinson has retired. So we have a new judge. And at this time, Magbanua's lawyers decide, well, let's try to file another motion to get out on bond and have an Arthur hearing and all that. Even though this had been denied a couple of times by Hankinson, they're doing their job as defense lawyers. They're going to file another motion, see if Judge Wheeler is going to be convinced. And COVID is one of the reasons they use for this motion to try to get her out on bond pre-trial. And Ruth includes the Gibson-Dunn letter, that's her attorney's letter, to the state, kind of giving guidance. And I'm not going to go through it. It's long. It's excellent. Buy the book. But the Gibson-Dunn letter provides an excellent job of providing a roadmap for the new judge, Judge Wheeler, of the case, but also why Judge Hankinson had denied those repeated requests by Magbanua's lawyers to try to get her out on bond. Now, thankfully, of course, Judge Wheeler denied that motion and said specifically, just because there was a mistrial doesn't mean there wasn't an overwhelming evidence of her potential guilt, and therefore he denied her motion for bond. But the other things, that was challenging was that they were also using COVID as a reason to try to get her out on bond, making arguments that, COVID, it's going to be unsafe, et cetera. So again, just using all of these different arguments to try to finagle a path for Katie. And the portion that I thought was really interesting, which was towards the end of right after, where she talks about how Judge Wheeler denied that motion, Ruth says, in the 6th year since the murder, we released a family statement that thanked the police and prosecutors and expressed hope that they would persevere and continue with the investigation. And I'll continue reading, but I'm like, wow, did they think that this wouldn't go forward? You know, can you imagine thinking that? So we understand that due process takes patience, we wrote. We pray that this next phase of the legal process moves quickly and that all those responsible for Dan's murder are held accountable. And we pray that for the chance to see and know Dan's 2 boys, our beloved grandsons again. So again, just this, them having to be advocates, right? And so I don't know, what did you guys think of that? It almost sounded to me like the family felt that they were a little concerned that this would just kind of, now we've got COVID, that this would just kind of, the prosecution wouldn't be motivated to move forward with the retrial, even though Georgia had said they would. I was just, that's just sad to me that, again, the family having to show, let's keep the pressure on the prosecution to do the right thing. I thought that was very interesting.
Well, I
Yeah.
can relate in that, you try to move on with your life and you try to carve out a life that isn't constantly informed by this trauma of this murder. And at the same time, you have experiences that drag you back in. So you can't really do that. And like with the Markels, I've had experiences that have shown me that I have to stay active and I have to stay involved. Otherwise, scales can tip toward the murderers fairly quickly and easily. And I've experienced that myself. And, with Ruth, talking about this is that everything is so uncertain. And then everything in our world was uncertain with COVID. I mean, everything was. And so this was no exception. And like everything was, priorities were changing about everything in the world, and the court system just being one territory of that. And things were being, cases were being dropped right and left simply because there was no time to, or place or money to handle them. So, I mean, I can see that it being a very legitimate concern of theirs and fear of theirs. I mean, it almost seems like a dream that we all went through that, but we did. And I mean, it was actually quite uncomfortable for me to read these sections of the book personally, because it took me back to that time that was so traumatic. And yeah, no staff
No
either.
one knew.
That's right.
So uncertain. Yeah. Just, can you imagine then waiting for a murder? I just can't even imagine.
And they're in another
That hasn't occurred to
country.
me.
So they're not even that familiar with our legal system.
Yeah.
So all of those factors.
And they're stuck in Canada. And they're stuck in Canada where they can't
Right.
cross borders because remember,
Yeah.
Canada shut down.
And
Canada.
the only thing you
Yeah.
can do is exert whatever little control that you have. So I could see why that would feel like they had to be ever present and sort of standing at the gate pushing, and that's exhausting. That is an exhausting way of life, and we were all exhausted during COVID, but like just add this dimension on top of it. It makes my staying at home and baking sourdough bread and doing yoga in my bedroom seem very, very ridiculous, compared to what they were dealing with. So, okay, we are on to 153, and Allison, you got something for us on 153?
Yes, in the middle of 153. Unless every detail of the case has been resolved, which in the light of our experience seems unlikely, I find myself 6 years after Dan was killed asking the same question I asked when I heard he had been shot. Will we ever see justice? I describe my plans to continue to pursue the truth for Dan and see those responsible be held to account. This is my mission now, along with my quest to see my grandsons and to give the boys the Jewish roots I had promised at the memorial. In the writing of this book, I've been driven to share my experience and insights in the sincere wish to provide help and relief to anyone else whose life is touched by this kind of dreadful misfortune. Working on behalf of Dan and his sons has given me a meaningful path forward and the hope for some sort of healing. Yeah, we see again here the extent of Ruth's altruism, and perhaps it's the same drive to help others that also allows her to find the strength. I know in my own life, being very goal focused offers grounding in the midst of trauma and is a source of resiliency. So I also see that evidence throughout Ruth's advocacy and even writing this book and all of her efforts.
Yes. I think we're sticking with you, Allison, to 155. There's just a whole lot of details between that of what was happening with COVID. And it did seem like Kawas and DeCoste were capitalizing on that and delaying and just using that system. Honestly, I just had a hard time reading that because it's just infuriating. I mean, I'm not a fan of Rashbaum, but that is worse in some ways, just how they tried to monkey with the system, including getting all up involved in the state attorney's office and trying to disqualify them, which we're going to hear about next.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly believe that defense lawyers are an essential part of our justice system and that every defendant deserves vigorous advocacy, but I also find it troubling when lawyers resort to tactics that seem deliberately misleading or manipulative, as the examples that you've just given, and there's more here on 155. So after their media campaign, their motions to delay began. They had filed a motion to disqualify the state attorney's office from even trying the case, which was a bold move in which they alleged prosecutors had intentionally obscured or withheld evidence and filed a motion to delay the trial again due to COVID-19. Both of Magbanua's attorneys are cancer survivors, and despite the rates of infection in Leon County dropping precipitously during that time, their doctors submitted letters saying it would not be safe for them to appear in court. The motion to disqualify accused the prosecutors of intentionally presenting misleading evidence and substantial misconduct. Jumping to 156, the state's response was, the state categorically denies any misconduct, including the allegations made by defendant in her recent motion to disqualify. Defendant's motion further alleges the reason her counsel was not able to competently cross-examine witnesses Hull and Corbett was because the defense was not given the exhibits in a timely manner. This is false. To the contrary, the state, pursuant to common practice and the judge's strong preference, made all exhibits available for inspection by the defense prior to trial, but the defense chose not to examine the items. This was possibly done to preserve the strategy of making speaking objections and commentary during the trial, indicating the defense had never seen the exhibits before and suggesting to the jury that the state was attempting to ambush the defendant in some way. The state anticipates the strategy could be employed again in the upcoming trial and therefore moves this honorable court to order the defense to examine the exhibits prior to trial and or in the alternative to preclude the defense/defendant from making speaking objections or engaging in any commentary in the presence of the jury regarding alleged discovery violations. The state requests that any such objections be addressed at sidebar outside the presence of the jury. Yeah, just so many shenanigans.
Oh, yeah. Just delaying. Yeah, on top of already delaying. And I can see where Ruth would feel, pretty terrified that, so much effort is being made to, just keep throwing so much confusion and conflict and everything that is somebody just going to throw up their hands and say, okay, uncle, I would certainly question that and be afraid of that. But, apparently, we've all learned about Georgia Cattleman.
Yeah. This is all playing out in real time. It's like one side will submit a request to the court and then, it takes however many weeks then for the other side to respond, and then having more weeks for the judge to reach a decision or to have a hearing about the matter. So it really is like a roller coaster.
That's exactly how she's described it in the book, isn't it? Yeah, somebody says Georgia was not happy. The defense questioned her integrity. I guess not, especially her. Maya says, I think Katie's attorneys acted so disgracefully. I don't like questioning attorneys' motivations and how they represent their clients, and I appreciate zealous advocacy, but their antics were unethical. I mean, I just saw that in Tara Kawas and how she handled her social media, which was ridiculous, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And then she jumped
totally
agree. Katie like a hot potato.
Yeah. So I don't think an attorney should be actively arguing with people on Instagram. That just looks so, I mean, it's like your case is going on, you're representing this person. And I saw she had this like sad picture of Katherine Magbanua looking like she was about to cry wearing a mask. And she put that on her Instagram. I'm like, that is so like weird. Why are you doing this? The case is still going on and you're trying to play it out on
Instagram. I mean, her Instagram was a hot mess. And then what did you think of this, Judy, when after the verdict, and she's having her boo-hoo session and everything in the courtroom. Of course, we're getting ahead of that with the book because the trial hasn't happened yet. And then after that, she goes out and does a whole lengthy interview where she's expressing all this like sadness for the victims and all this, I'm going to say bullshit, pardon my French.
That Katie thinks of the Markels every day, or Dan Markel every day. It's like that is so untrue. It was so phony.
I just thought she was really, I'm glad she's not on any further cases, and I don't think she would.
No. Mm-hmm.
And the way DeCoe said to Pat Sanford, it's not the Federal Bureau of Intimidation, is it? Sit down and stop grandstanding. Good Lord. Man, I didn't remember that, Maya. In what trial was that? Was that?
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, that was just uncalled for. Why do you have to say that as an attorney?
Tara Kawas in that public ridiculous interview with Mentor Lawyer. That's who it was, with Mentor Lawyer. That's right. And she talked and talked and talked. She went on and on, said that the media had become like her family during the trial. What? That's just nuts. Okay, moving on. Did you, Allison, finish with your section there?
Yes.
Okay. I'm moving on to the bottom of 157. So if we're at 157, go to the bottom of that page. So we were devastated again and again that Magbanua's trial was delayed during the pandemic. I am still very anxious about the pandemic in Florida and conflicted about going forward. The unknown is both draining and concerning, not just due to the pandemic, as I'll continue to follow all safety conventions and be aware of my surroundings. It's the what ifs, the thing that there is no control over, the trial. What if another mistrial is declared? What if she's found not guilty? The link between Magbanua, Rivera, and others, and we know who the others are, is not to be underestimated. A conviction could mean the difference in moving forward with others being charged in this murder for hire plot. It's just the pressure, just incredible pressure. And then moving down from there, jumping down from there, on 158 toward the bottom, I must say I am concerned that my life feels more like a playground of seesaws, roller coasters, ping pong, and ups and downs. This doesn't feel like play, but rather hard work and stress. At this point, our lives as victims are back on the roller coaster. If this was fiction, there would be a narrow road with only twists and turns, but this life story is real. The drama between August 25th and September 2021 was so intense and great for storytelling, but we are living the turmoil. Everyone says, Ruth, you are strong. Although I have been through many tragedies, I wonder, will my strength run out with time and age? Nevertheless, I cherish the people who are here with me and who help prevent life's events from pulling me down. Oh, Ruth. Anyway, just a moment of sending some good energy to Ruth, because she is a strong person and she presents as a very strong person, and publicly and privately. And in this book, she does lift the veil, and we get a glimpse behind that and her personal suffering and stress. 10 years, you guys, on top of grieving this. And, they're not out of the woods yet. So it's a lot. And I'm glad she wrote this book. It's very illuminating. All right, we're moving on to the appeal process.
I think that's me.
That is you, La Belvie.
So what in this section with so we're talking about Garcia's appeal. I didn't necessarily think the Garcia's appeal that was per se interesting, although if you weren't aware, he appealed on 2 grounds. One, they argued that the state failed to timely disclose an expert opinion on that bullet expert on the trajectory. Because, of course, and you can see why that would be significant to Garcia, because there's a definite height difference between Luis Rivera and Sigfredo Garcia. But there were some shenanigans in that argument, because the state attorney general's response to that was, well, you also had the ability to see that information. You just waited. And so you were basically untimely. And then they also appealed on some of the jury questions, again, on the principal argument. But I thought what was more interesting on this, which relates to, again, exactly what Ruth described to us when she talked early on, was that this idea of going through the different victim advocates and the different players in the system, and again, now having to learn, to get to know another person. And so when Garcia appealed, the Markels got yet another victim advocate for the appeal process to explain how that went. And so, and just listening to her, and I think she definitely conveyed that she had a great relationship with all of them. But again, just having to, this is another person we have to learn. This is another legal process we have to learn. And just on top of everything, and we haven't even gotten to Katie's trial yet. So I just can't imagine, again, how much that is to have to learn that from, non-lawyers in Canada in COVID. I can't imagine how much stress that was for her and the family. But the appeal was denied. So that's the end of that story, as we all know.
Yes, and she said today on SCS, for anybody that watched STS, that all of his appeals have been denied, including something recently, like within the last 10 days. He did an ineffective counsel appeal. I don't know if that's new or whatever, but she said that that she gave that update on STS about Garcia's. All of his appeals are denied now, which then lent the question of, will he talk? Now that appeals are not an issue, who knows? Yeah, I think Mia Beto, I think he's out of appeals for the moment, but he's not on death row, so he doesn't get a lot of free appellate assistance, and he doesn't have money, unlike the Adelsons. So he can't pay for expensive appellate attorneys. So anyway, hopefully that means he's living out his life and thinking about his choices and thinking maybe he has some other choices. Anyway, even if it was just to clarify the extortion BS. Dee Dee says, I was offended by people telling me I was strong after my loss. No one sees what one is feeling on inside. Usually it's second by second. You're getting by and through a moment of your day. Yeah, sometimes it's like people say things like that because they just want to believe that you're strong. And it's a bit of projection sometimes. So
Well, I
It's-
also think people can be strong and vulnerable and traumatized.
yeah, and present strong, and yeah, and
Yes.
you're just
Oh, yeah.
desperately wanting somebody to see under what's really going on behind that. So hopefully we have a community here of people that feel safe, um, being real and vulnerable. Okay, so moving forward, let's see, we just did Allison. What did you just read, Allison?
Um,
Did you just read 161?
no, I haven't read that. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to read 160 then. I got something on 160, and then we're going to move to 161. We then embarked on another lengthy legal process. Did you read this, La Belvie, about the appeal?
Yeah,
Anyway,
I took care of the Garcia appeal and that the fact that they have a new victim advocate. I think that's what you asked me to
okay,
cover.
yes, but this was interesting. This part was interesting because this speaks of another case in Florida that had some similarities. We had recently learned that Denise Williams, in another famous murder case in Tallahassee, had her life sentence reduced on appeal. In 2018, Denise Williams was convicted of orchestrating the murder of her husband, Mike Williams, in a conspiracy with Williams' best friend at the time, a man who Denise was having an affair with. By 2020, Denise had her first-degree murder charge and life sentence reversed after filing an appeal. A panel of 3 judges determined that the state failed to prove that Denise abetted Mike's killer, who had admitted committing the crime. While her murder conviction was reversed, the charge for conspiracy to commit murder still remains. We learned that the family of Mike Williams felt humiliated by Denise Williams' success on her appeal. We shared their sense of grief about that outcome. I had been in touch with Mike's mother, Cheryl, who shared her profound disappointment. And I have certainly walked that road too, having a conviction not overturned, but a sentence overturned. And, this is why, I have really tried to impress upon people why it's so important that for all of these killers that their sentences run consecutive. Because if you lose one of them, you still have 2 to fall back on. And so, if they're concurrent, that means they're all running together. So consecutive is a huge part of the sentencing process. And luckily, I think all of them have gotten consecutive sentences because it's appellate stuff, that, you get through with the conviction and then you're in a whole other world of appeals.
Well,
Okay.
except for the plea deal.
Yes, except for the plea deal. You're right. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see if we have any further plea deals coming down the pike. So, Allison, we're back to you on 161.
Okay, new drama and more developments. Just as we were hoping to move into the retrial of Magbanua, with the dates ever changing and delayed, we heard news that the defense received letters from another man, Walter Rayborn, a man awaiting a dual homicide trial who had spent time with Rivera while incarcerated. The Tallahassee Democrat reported that an inmate at the Leon County Jail, Walter Rayborn, claimed Rivera was coerced by Georgia Kappelman to testify and commit perjury. Then jumping to the state attorney's response in 162. State Attorney Jack Cramble refuted this, calling Walter Rayborn a threat to society. The allegations are preposterous and they're being made by a multi-murder, neo-Nazi, convicted felon, said Cramble. Right now, Mrs. Kappelman is an extremely good prosecutor, seeking to have him incarcerated for the rest of his life and perhaps have him put to death. He's trying to disparage the person prosecuting him for murder and seeking the death penalty. Yeah, I think that, again, the defense attorneys should have an obligation to vet potential, especially jailhouse snitches, before running to the media and further traumatizing the family of a murder victim.
So, Judy, do you remember that whole incident with that Rayborn? I didn't remember that at all.
Yeah, I do sort of remember that, but it just kind of goes to show how Katie's attorneys did whatever they could to throw a wrench in the works, and they went all out. But that is their job. So I don't totally fault them personally for that. But it is sad that they just keep traumatizing Dan's family for so many years because of these things.
Yeah, I guess for me, thinking about about her attorneys, Katie's attorneys, how they were just throwing every possible thing to try to create a monkey wrench or to slow things down or to create confusion or, for the jury to, muddy the waters. And at the same time, going out there and just claiming she was completely and purely innocent. It's like they're trying to
Yeah.
kind of have it both ways. Like she's
Yeah.
innocent, but we got to do all this, muddying the waters to try to convince for 12 jurors that, there's reasonable doubt. Anyway,
Yeah, but they got paid, so
yeah,
so
by somebody, right?
yeah.
Any of you guys want to weigh in your opinions about that? Who paid them? Any ideas? Any thoughts?
I mean, I actually think that the Adelson family is kind of cheap. And with the sister-in-law embezzling almost $1 million, it's possible that the lawyers were paid by her own family, as she claims. But yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, it would be pragmatic for the Adelson family to cover her expenses because, yeah, she's the next link to them.
Right. And they were already paying her, it would be on brand because they were already paying her, in various ways. But it's one of those mysteries that may never be solved. Okay, jumping forward to 166 now in this post-trial in Toronto chapter. I'm going to read part of the another email from Ruth's murder coach, just because I really appreciate these emails. This is the second half of it. So like us, you have no choice but to wait it out. Sort of like having a tiger by the tail. You cannot let go no matter what. It took us 14 years chasing her across Europe before she was finally brought back and convicted. Ruth, I am not certain what the odds of getting caught and convicted are in Florida, but I do know that in Puerto Rico, they have an 80% chance of never being convicted. Knowing the statistics, and the murderers do know it, people are prepared to risk murdering for profit. You see, these people know that the court system only too well and know that it is overloaded to begin with. To our embarrassment, they also happen to believe that with the help of a good lawyer, they will get away with it. They really do. Justice has very little to do with it. That is why, in my opinion, it is so important to get to know the prosecutors and communicate with them often, since with the volume of cases they carry, it is too easy for your case to get overlooked in the shuffle. Happy New Year, Abe. Whew, that's heavy. I mean, he's really pushing her to stay very actively involved because of his own experience. And I believe his was in Florida as well, his case. But yeah, there was a Puerto Rican element there. I do remember that case, but I want to go back and look it up. Okay, we're back to you, La Bellevue on 167.
So we never were sitting idle and worked hard on promoting reforms to Florida law to allow visitation to our grandchildren. As previously discussed, a bill inspired by our family was introduced in the Florida legislature in early 2020 to provide grandparents with greater access to courts to petition for visitation with grandchildren in extraordinary cases like ours. After being filed by Senator Jeff Brandes, it was approved unanimously by Senator Lauren Book's Children, Families, and Elder Affairs Committee. Book continued to pledge her support for this ongoing initiative. We are blessed with the leadership of Karen Ciphers and our lobbyists, Jeff Johnston and Amanda Stewart, who continue their work to pass this legislation into law. And that's so inspiring that, dealing with all of this, you've got the appeal of Garcia, you're waiting for Katie's retrial, but they're not wasting any moments. They're like, okay, let's focus on the act. And so it's just amazing all this work that they continue to do in addition to just being victims and dealing with this and this upcoming trial. And of course, we know that it was passed, which is fantastic. I don't know that actually, I don't know that it was I don't know if Ruth knew it had passed by the time she finished her book. Do you know, Katie?
Um,
Because it was
that's a
July
good
1st.
question.
It was passed in the the Senate in like March, and then it was passed so in February it passed the House, and then in March 22 it passed the Senate, and then it was signed by the governor, and it was effective July 1, 2022.
I think the book might have been published before that, but Ruth told me the other day on the phone that it got kicked back at one point too. I think from the House back to the Senate or vice versa.
There
Then
was
they
a
had to
lot
read
of
it.
drama on the scope and the review, and
Yeah, they had to redo some of the language. So it wasn't just a step-by-step process, but I don't think it was yet. I think she was still in the soup of
yeah,
it when the book came out.
wow,
Yeah, because she's referring a lot to 2021 here.
yeah.
So yeah, but that's a good question. All right. So we are back to Allison back on 168 and 169.
Okay, sure. I just wanted to clarify my answer to your last question, because I do think this is a good point that I wasn't thinking about. So Margie says that I think the Adelsons are or were at least contributing to Katie's legal fees. It explains why she would refuse immunity and not turn on the Adelsons. That does make a lot of sense, because it is perplexing that she refused immunity. But yeah, that would be one explanation. She would prefer not to admit what she had done if she thought she could get off with expensive legal counsel, but obviously that didn't work out for her. Okay, so yeah, 168. A piece of Dan's writing has gained new tragic relevance for his own life. Keep the fire burning. That's a quote from Dan. Dan wrote this message to a friend prior to his death. We have listened and learned to keep the fire burning, despite the obstacles of the pandemic. We cannot sugarcoat the agony of waiting. My life is filled with trauma, hurdles, surprises, and strain. Then jumping to 169, the family statement. 7 years ago, our beloved Dan Markel was taken from us in an act of terrible, calculated violence. Danny was a beautiful spirit, a passionate thinker, a devoted brother and son, and a dedicated, joyful father. He brought people together and celebrated the passages of life with all of his heart. Our family mourns his loss today, as always, with profound gratitude for the community of law enforcement, prosecutors, friends, and strangers who continue to seek justice in Dan's memory. 7 years is a long time, but waiting is made tolerable by the belief that justice will come and that we will have a chance to see and know Dan's two sons again. We pray that in the long course of our grief and sorrow for Dan, the 7th year brings renewed energy and progress, both in honoring his life and in finding accountability for all of those who are responsible for taking it. All of our communities have suffered a horrific loss and isolation. Throughout, we thank all who remain engaged in our and Dan's story. Our hearts are together as we move forward in the pursuit of peace and justice. Yeah, so, I find it's inspirational to see such a beautiful legacy to Dan emerging despite the devastating tragedies. And I think that's a testament to his life and impact.
Yes, I think so too. And thank you for putting that video on there, Judy. I was just going to ask somebody to do it, and you jumped the gun.
It's a great video. I saw
Yeah.
it quite a while ago.
So we're going to end on this passage, and then we have a video that Ruth sent me to play. Let's put Ruth up here to play to take us out on. So Ruth Markel will be bookending this presentation tonight. And so here's page 171. Justice for Dan didn't want Danny's 49th birthday to pass by unobserved, especially because it would have fallen in the middle of the trial, which was no longer happening at that time. Karen Ciphers, Jason Solomon, Jeremy Cohen, and Tamara Demko arranged virtual and in-person celebrations to honor his memory. They created a toy drive in which friends could donate toys or money to Toys for Tots in Tallahassee. Those who lived in town brought these toys to Winthrop Park, located just a block from where Dan had lived and where he had loved to bring the boys to play. The park has a bench with a plaque in his memory. Karen and Tamara decorated the bench with flowers and donated toys, which had been sent from friends around the world. News coverage of the event led to others contributing gifts. It was a joy to know that children would receive these gifts in Dan's honor at a time when our family was missing him and his boys so deeply. And I have a story about that bench that you guys may or may not know, but I visited that bench about 3 times. I left flowers there twice at that Winthrop Park. It is walking distance from Dan's house on Trescott. And before Ruth left town, she had been gifted a bunch of things, and she ended up with a gift certificate, a gift card that she couldn't use. It was for a pizza restaurant. And, I mean, these days are grueling, and the, time is just evaporates. And so you think you're going to have time to do things. At least I did when I was down there. I'm sure Judy could attest to that too. And suddenly, it's just gone. And so she had this gift card, which obviously she couldn't use as she was headed back to Canada. So she gave it to me because I was going to still be there a couple more days. I decided to leave early. So I thought, what am I going to do with this gift card? Because I didn't, it was like a $50 gift card for a pizza restaurant. So I'm there by myself anyway. So I decided the last day that I was there, I drove to the park and I said, whoever is sitting on that bench is going to get this gift card. So I walked up to the bench and there was a woman around my age, I'm in my 60s, sitting there, and Dan's plaque is on that bench. And I just sat down next to this woman and asked her, do you know what this bench is that you're sitting on? And she had no idea, and she hadn't even seen the plaque. So I talked to her about it. She had absolutely no idea. She lives in Tallahassee, so that tells you something about jury potential there. She lives there, and she's at that park, and which has factored prominently in that story, and she had no idea who I was talking about or the bench she was sitting on. So I told her a little bit about it, and that I was there for the trial and what was going on, and I said I had decided that whoever was sitting on this bench was going to get this gift card that I can't use and somebody else couldn't use, and so gave it to her. And this woman was there with her grandchildren. So she said, "Oh, this is perfect. I'll take my grandchildren for pizza." And I just thought that is just so perfect, because how Ruth would have loved to take her grandchildren for pizza. So, life goes on, and love goes on. And anyway, so that bench, and I left flowers there as well. And so whoever got those, So anyway, our hearts go out to Ruth and all of her losses. And we are going to now play this beautiful video that she shared with us. Hang on, let me find it. Here it is.
Grandchildren fatherless. Then the children's mother.
There we go.
Imagine this terrible scenario. Your only son is murdered, leaving his 2 young children, your grandchildren, fatherless. Then the children's mother, your son's ex-wife, cuts you out of their lives. This leaves you without the only remaining connection to your son, and it leaves your grandchildren without any connection to their father's parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, or cousins. Worse, it leaves your grandchildren without the love and support you always offered, even more important now in this time of grief. Years pass while investigators work to find your son's murderer. Tragically, law enforcement then announced to the public their theory. They have evidence that the ex-wife's family hired hitmen to kill your son so that his ex-wife could have full custody of his children, your grandchildren. There's a lot of evidence, and one of the hitmen even confesses and testifies to his role in the crime and tells investigators who hired them. While there's hope that all of your son's killers will be brought to justice, the legal system moves very slowly. More years pass. Your grandchildren are getting older. So are you. Despite many efforts for outreach, your grandchildren's mother doesn't budge. You still cannot talk with your grandchildren or see them. Meanwhile, they continue to be raised by other family members who law enforcement claim are responsible for the murder of their father. What can you do? You think, I want to petition the courts for visitation. But your grandchildren live in Florida. Florida law won't allow you to petition the courts. So you can't do that.
Members, our next bill is HB 1119 by Representative Toledo, Grandparent Visitation Rights. You're recognized to explain the bill.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members. Before you today is House Bill 1119, dealing with grandparents' visitation rights. Under current Florida law, grandparents can only petition courts for visitation with grandchildren in extremely limited circumstances. The bill will create a point of access to courts for grandparents in cases where their child was killed and courts have ruled against the surviving parent in a wrongful death claim. However, this bill remains protective of the rights of Florida parents without changing the many factors courts consider in determining visitation. That is the bill. This is just one step forward. This bill creates an opportunity for children who've lost so much already, and due to the wrongdoing of a surviving parent, to receive support and affection of the family members who love and miss them dearly, like the Markel family, and I ask for your favorable support. 18 yeas, 0 nays, Mr. Chairman.
Members, by your vote, that bill will be reported favorably. Congratulations on this bill. Our next bill, members, is HB.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you, Allison, La Belvie, Judy. It was wonderful sharing space with you and all of your contributions and your unique perspectives and reading and sharing. It's been my honor and privilege to share space with you guys. And thanks to everybody else who came in and has been joining the book club and honoring Ruth in this way. This is a feat. I know, because I'm working on my own book. This is not easy. And she's done it. And that was more emotional than I anticipated that to be, that segment. I thought it was going to be more dry and legal and everything, but nothing is. And as you can see, the grandkids just are laced through everything. So, yeah. So any final thoughts, starting with you, Allison? Final thoughts?
Oh, well, it's just such an honor, especially for Ruth to come on. I really admire her.
Yeah, great to see Ruth again. She's such a strong advocate for her son.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no,
How
thank
about
you
you,
so
Bob?
much for including me. I'm glad you asked me. I remember when you had asked for volunteers, like, should I do it? And so thank you for asking me. It was an honor. Thank you.
Yeah, and Ruth really coached me on, she said, you need to get more lawyers in there, especially on this material. So I'm like, duh. So I'm so glad that it worked out. Well, thank you for joining us, everybody. We still have one more left for next week. I haven't nailed down the panel yet, so I'm not going to announce that right now because I don't want to put anybody on the spot publicly, but I'll let you guys know who's going to be on that. And we'll wind up this book club next week with the final section, which is called Reflections and Looking Forward. So maybe from there we can bounce forward. Since we're looking forward, we will be able to now look forward to where we're at now. But I think we did a great job of staying on.
Yeah.
Staying within the boundaries.
It's been
Right
over
on time.
2 hours again.
I know.
There's so much to talk about.
There is. I mean, you think it's not going to, but yeah. Anyway, thanks for joining, everybody. Lots of love to you all. Remember
Thank
to do a
you.
little something self-care for yourself tonight, because this was heavy material and it's triggering for people. So do something nice for yourself tonight, even if it's washing your face before you go to bed and just feeling good about that. Anyway,
Yeah.
thanks for the love, everybody, and we'll see you next Wednesday, same
Okay.
time, same place.
Thank you.
All
Great
right.
idea.
Thank you.
Good night.
Have a good night.
Take care.